Today's number 2 most urgent vulnerability is CVE 2026-20253, and it lands high on the list for a simple reason. It is a critical Splunk Enterprise flaw. It requires no authentication, and CISA lists it in the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog. The issue affects a PostgreSQL sidecar service endpoint in Splunk Enterprise, where a network-reachable user could create or truncate arbitrary files without credentials. That combination matters. Splunk often sits close to security data, operational logs, and monitoring pipelines. If an exposed component can be reached and can perform file operations without authentication, defenders need to treat it as an immediate exposure management problem, not a routine backlog item. This episode is defense only: what the vulnerability is, why the score is so high, how to think about exposure, and what to do now. CVE 2026-20253 is a Splunk Enterprise vulnerability categorized as CVE-306, missing authentication for a critical function. In plain English, that means a component offers a powerful action, but does not properly require the user to prove who they are before that action is allowed. According to the NVD description, the vulnerable area is a PostgreSQL sidecar service endpoint. Through that endpoint, an unauthenticated user could create or truncate arbitrary files. Creating files can introduce unexpected data into places an application depends on. Truncating files can reduce them to empty or incomplete content, which can break services, corrupt application state, or interfere with logging and monitoring. The important point is not that every deployment is automatically reachable from the internet. The point is that any network-reachable vulnerable endpoint removes the normal login barrier entirely. Verdict: this is a critical, act now vulnerability because the path to impact is remote and unauthenticated. The CVSS score is 9.8, and the two parts that matter most are access and impact. First, the attack vector is network-based, with low complexity, no privileges required, and no user interaction required. That means the vulnerable service does not need a local account, an insider foothold, or a victim clicking something to reach the dangerous function. Second, the impact ratings are high for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. For this specific issue, the described primitive is arbitrary file creation or truncation. That directly maps to integrity and availability concerns, and in systems that handle sensitive operational data, file-level control can have broader security consequences. You do not need to memorize the whole vector. Remote, unauthenticated, low complexity, high impact is the story. The reason this rises above normal patch priority noise is that CVE 2026-20253 is on CISA's Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog. KEV status is a major signal because it means defenders should assume real-world exploitation is not theoretical. We are not going to discuss exploit mechanics or payloads, but from a risk management perspective, the message is clear. Vulnerable, reachable Splunk Enterprise instances deserve urgent attention. The EPSS percentile provided here is 0.99807, which also places it extremely high compared with other vulnerabilities for expected exploitation activity. In practical terms, this is the kind of CVE that should trigger an asset search, a version check, network exposure review, and a patch or mitigation decision quickly. If Splunk is part of your logging or security operations stack, availability matters too. Disrupting or damaging files can affect the systems your team relies on to see what else is happening. To check exposure, start with your Splunk Enterprise inventory. The NVD description says Splunk Enterprise 10.2 versions below 10.2.4 and 10 versions below 10.0.7 are affected, while Splunk Enterprise 9.4 and earlier are not affected. Still, use the official Splunk advisory as your source of truth for exact applicability in your environment, especially if you have complex deployments, staging systems, or partially upgraded nodes. Next, identify where Splunk Enterprise is installed and whether the PostgreSQL sidecar service endpoint is enabled and reachable from any untrusted network segment. Do not limit the review to public internet exposure. Internal reachability can still matter if an attacker has any foothold elsewhere in the environment. Check firewalls, security groups, segmentation rules, and management networks. Finally, confirm whether temporary mitigations were applied consistently across all relevant instances, not just the obvious production hosts. The primary fix is to upgrade Splunk Enterprise to a fixed version, following Splunk's official advisory and your normal change control process. Based on the NVD description, Fixed versions include 10.2.4 for the 10.2 line and 10.0.7 for the 10 line. If you cannot immediately upgrade, the NVD description states that you can mitigate the vulnerability by disabling the PostgreSQL sidecar service. Treat that as a temporary risk reduction step, not a reason to defer patching indefinitely. In parallel, harden reachability. Restrict access to Splunk services to trusted administration networks and required application paths only. Validate that unauthenticated users cannot reach sensitive service endpoints from the internet or broad internal networks. Look for unexpected file changes, service instability, or sudden logging gaps around Splunk systems. But keep the focus on containment and verification rather than trying to reproduce the flaw. After remediation, document which instances were upgraded, which were mitigated, and which network controls were tightened. Quick recap. CVE 2026-20253 is today's number 2 most urgent CVE, a 9.8 critical Splunk Enterprise vulnerability caused by missing authentication on a PostgreSQL sidecar service endpoint. The risk is unauthenticated arbitrary file creation or truncation, and the urgency is reinforced by CISA KEV status and a very high EPSS percentile. Check versions, verify reachability, upgrade to the fixed release, and use the sidecar mitigation only if you cannot patch immediately. If this breakdown helped, subscribe for the daily ranked CVE deep dive, and for the complete top 10 list, see the full ranked report at link.